I did not plan to be at my cousin's wedding for more than an hour. That was the deal I made with myself in the car, parked 3 blocks away because valet felt like an unnecessary luxury for someone who already felt like an unnecessary guest. I told myself I would show my face, hand over the envelope, smile politely for exactly long enough to avoid future accusations of being distant, and then disappear before anyone remembered I was there. If you had asked anyone in my family, they would have told you that disappearing was my special talent anyway. I am Alex. I am 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the person everyone expected nothing from. It sounds dramatic written out like that, but in my family it was treated as a casual fact, the way you acknowledge the weather or the time. My cousin Mark was the golden one. Good grades without trying, charming without effort, the kind of guy teachers rooted for and relatives bragged about. His wedding reception reflected that perfectly. The venue was expensive but tasteful, the kind of place with soft lighting that made everyone look kinder than they usually were. There were white flowers everywhere, long tables, polished glasses, and a string quartet playing something gentle enough to fade into the background. The speeches were queued up like a highlight reel of Mark's life, each one polishing the same story from a slightly different angle. I arrived alone, which surprised no one. My Aunt Carol noticed immediately and gave me the tight smile she always used when she wanted credit for being polite. She hugged me with one arm, the other carefully holding her champagne upright. "Alex," she said, drawing out my name like she was checking a box. "You made it. I wasn't sure you would." That was our usual greeting. Not hello, not how are you. Just a mild expression of surprise that I had shown up at all. I said I would. I replied, keeping my voice light. Years of practice had taught me that anything heavier would be used as evidence later. She nodded as if that settled something and immediately turned away to greet someone else, someone who mattered more. I watched her laugh louder with them than she had with me, her shoulders relaxing now that she was speaking to a more reliable audience. I took a glass of water from the bar first, then changed my mind and asked for a drink. Not because I wanted one, but because standing there with nothing in my hands felt too honest. The bartender slid the glass over without comment. I thanked him, took a small sip, and scanned the room for a familiar face I could stand near without having to explain myself. Growing up, family gatherings followed a predictable script. Mark and his siblings would be asked about school, sports, careers. I would be asked if I was still figuring things out. When I got older, that question evolved into, "So, what are you up to these days?" delivered with a polite tilt of the head that already assumed the answer would be underwhelming. I learned early that if I spoke too much, it confirmed their expectations. If I spoke too little, it confirmed them too. There was no winning, just minimizing damage. The first hint of disrespect at the reception was subtle enough that I almost missed it. I found a seat at a table near the back, next to a couple I did not recognize. My place card had my name spelled wrong. Not badly wrong, just one letter off, like someone had typed it quickly and not bothered to check. Everyone else's names were perfect, complete with titles and accents where needed. Mine looked like an afterthought. I considered asking the coordinator to fix it, then decided against it. That would require explaining who I was. I sat down and folded the card in half, slipping it into my jacket pocket like a secret. As the night went on, the speeches began. Mark's father talked about how proud he was, how Mark had always been driven, how he had known from a young age that his son would do great things. Mark's best friend told stories about late nights studying and early mornings training, about ambition and loyalty and success. Each speech landed perfectly, laughter and applause arriving on cue. I clapped when everyone else did, smiled when it was expected, and drank slowly. Then my Aunt Carol stood up. She had that particular energy she always carried when she thought she had the room's attention. She tapped her glass with a spoon, the sharp sound cutting through the chatter. People turned. The room quieted. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the kind that arrives before something you know you will replay later. "I just want to say a few words," she began, beaming. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark's aunt. I've watched him grow up, and honestly, we always knew he would end up here." There were murmurs of agreement. Heads nodded. She continued, "In every family, there are the ones who surprise you, who exceed expectations." She paused, smiling wider. "And then there are the ones you don't expect much from." A ripple of laughter moved through the room, light and unchallenged. My stomach dropped, even though I knew better than to be surprised. She glanced in my direction then, not directly, but close enough that I felt seen in the worst way. "And that's okay," she said quickly, as if offering comfort. "Not everyone needs to be extraordinary." The laughter grew louder. Someone at my table laughed too, a quick sound before they realized I was not joining in. I felt heat rise to my face, but I smiled anyway. I lifted my glass and took a measured sip, keeping my expression neutral. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Part of me wanted to stand up, to leave, to reclaim some dignity by removing myself from the situation entirely. Another part, the one that had been quietly paying attention for years, stayed seated. Because what my aunt did not know, what no one in that room knew, was that my role in this family had never been what they assumed. I had learned early that being underestimated was not just a burden. It was cover. And as she kept talking, leaning into the joke, basking in the laughter she had created, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I did not look at it yet. I just smiled, finished my drink, and waited. I stayed seated for the rest of the speech, clapping at the right moments, smiling when everyone else smiled. My aunt eventually wrapped up with a toast to Mark and his new wife, and the room lifted their glasses in unison. I raised mine too, even though my hand was shaking slightly. No one noticed. No one ever did. That was the benefit of being the one people expected nothing from. You could be falling apart quietly, and it would still fit the narrative. After the speeches, the reception loosened into movement. Chairs scraped back, people stood, hugged, laughed louder. Music shifted into something more upbeat. The lights dimmed just a touch, enough to give the room a celebratory glow. I excused myself from the table and headed toward the edge of the room, where the noise softened and conversations became more fragmented. My phone buzzed again. This time I checked it. A single message sat at the top of my screen. "Let me know when," it read. No name attached, just the contact saved under a neutral label. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. Not yet. Mark spotted me near the bar and waved me over. He looked genuinely happy, flushed with attention, buoyed by the kind of approval that had always followed him. I was glad for him, or at least I told myself I was. "Alex," he said, pulling me into a quick hug. "You made it." "I'm glad." There it was again. That mild surprise. That assumption that my presence was optional. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. He laughed, already half turned toward someone else. "You should meet my in-laws. They're great." He gestured vaguely, then drifted away before I could respond. I leaned against the bar and watched the room. My mother sat at a nearby table with my Aunt Carol and a cluster of relatives. Their heads were close together, voices lowered just enough to feel intentional. Every now and then, one of them glanced in my direction. Not directly, never directly, just enough to remind me that I was being discussed. Growing up, I learned to recognize that look. It meant decisions were being made without me. My mother eventually caught my eye and waved me over, the kind of wave that looks friendly from a distance but feels more like a summons when you know her. I took a breath and walked toward the table. "Alex," she said, smiling too brightly. "Sit down. We were just talking about you." I resisted the urge to make a joke. Instead, I pulled out a chair. My Aunt Carol leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "We were wondering," she said, lowering her voice, "what your plans are these days. Still doing whatever it is you do?" There it was. The familiar dismissal, wrapped in curiosity. "I'm working," I replied evenly. She tilted her head. "Doing what?" "Finance," I said. Not a lie, just incomplete. My mother nodded, as if this was new information she had already decided how to feel about. "Well," she said, "as long as you're comfortable." Comfortable. The word she used when she meant settled. When she meant not ambitious. Before I could respond, Carol continued. "You know, Mark and his wife are starting their life together. Big plans. Honeymoon, house, the whole thing." She smiled at Mark's wife across the room, then back at me. It must be nice to watch from the sidelines. Something in her tone shifted. Not playful anymore. Testing. I smiled back, the same practiced expression I had perfected over years. "It is," I said. "They look happy." She nodded, satisfied, and turned the conversation back to safer topics. I sat there for another minute, then excused myself, claiming I needed air. Outside, the night was cool and quiet. The venue had a terrace overlooking a stretch of dark water, lights reflecting off the surface in soft ripples. I leaned against the railing and let the sounds of the party fade behind me. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the weight of it all. The years of being talked around instead of talked to. The assumptions. The jokes that landed just a little too close to the truth they believed. My phone buzzed again. This time, the message was longer. They just finalized the transfer instructions this morning. Everything is queued. Once it clears, it's done. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. The knot in my chest tightened, but not with fear. With clarity. I did not reply. Inside, the music swelled, and someone cheered. I took one last breath of the cool air and went back in. The next hour passed in fragments. Conversations blurred together. People asked me polite questions and drifted away when my answers did not entertain them. My Aunt Carol grew louder as the night went on, her laughter sharper, her comments less filtered. At one point, she leaned across a table and said, within earshot of several people, "Alex has always been independent. We never really had to worry about him needing support." My mother nodded along, adding, "He's very self-sufficient. Always has been." It sounded like praise if you did not know the translation. It meant don't expect anything from us. I caught Mark's eye again later, near the dance floor. He looked tired now, the adrenaline wearing off. He motioned me over, his expression more serious. "Hey," he said quietly. "Did you hear what my mom said earlier?" I shrugged. She was giving a toast. He hesitated. "Yeah. I mean, she didn't mean anything by it." There it was. The reflexive defense. The minimization. "I know," I said. And I did. She meant exactly what she said. He exhaled, relieved, and clapped me on the shoulder. "You're a good sport," he said. "Always have been." That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not snapped. Shifted. Like a piece sliding into place. Because being a good sport had cost me more than they ever realized. As the night wound down, the focus turned to logistics. Bags were gathered. Goodbyes exchanged. Someone mentioned the honeymoon, a long trip planned with multiple stops, all carefully arranged. My Aunt Carol spoke about it loudly, detailing the hotels, the excursions, the generosity of the family trust that made it all possible. "Our parents set it up years ago," she said proudly. "For special occasions. Weddings. Life milestones." She smiled around the room. "It's wonderful to see it finally used for something meaningful." Meaningful. The word hung in the air. I felt my phone vibrate one last time. "Just checking," the message read. "Do you want me to hold?" I looked at my aunt, at my mother, at my cousin laughing with his new wife, unaware of the conversations happening behind the scenes. I thought about the years of being overlooked, the jokes, the quiet assumptions. I thought about the folded place card in my pocket, my name spelled wrong. I typed a single word. "Wait." And as I slipped my phone away and stepped back into the room, I realized that nothing about this night was going to unfold the way they expected. The morning after the wedding, I woke up with the strange, hollow quiet that follows a night where everything looks fine on the surface, but something fundamental has shifted underneath. My phone lay on the nightstand, face down, as if it already knew I was not ready to look at it. For a moment, I stayed still, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, replaying my aunt's laugh, my mother's nod, Mark's easy dismissal. None of it was new. That was the part that hurt the most. It was familiar, predictable, comfortable for everyone but me. I finally reached for my phone. No new messages. The last one still sat there, waiting, frozen in time. "Do you want me to hold?" I did not respond. I put the phone back down and sat up slowly, letting the weight of my own choices settle in. I took the day off work, not because I needed rest, but because I needed space. Space to think without interruptions, without expectations. I went for a long walk through my neighborhood, hands in my pockets, head down. I passed cafes where people laughed over coffee, offices where people hurried inside with purpose, families heading to brunch. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. I had spent most of my life feeling like I existed just outside of that belonging, close enough to observe, never close enough to be counted. By the afternoon, the anger crept in. Not explosive, not dramatic. Just a steady, simmering realization that I had allowed myself to be shaped by their low expectations. I had stayed quiet to keep the peace. I had downplayed my successes to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. I had learned to smile when they laughed, to nod when they dismissed me, to accept crumbs of acknowledgement as if they were generosity. That night, my mother called. "Did you get home all right?" she asked, her voice careful. "Yes," I said. A pause. "Your aunt feels bad," she continued. "About what she said." I almost laughed. Almost. She didn't mean it the way it sounded, my mother added quickly. You know how she is. I do, I said. And I did. Another pause, heavier this time. We just worry about you, she said. You're different from the rest of us. Different. Not special. Not independent. Just different. I'm fine, I replied. I always am. She seemed satisfied with that and ended the call shortly after. I set my phone down and felt the familiar sense of being misunderstood settle over me like a blanket I had worn for years. Only this time, instead of wrapping myself in it, I pushed it aside. The fall was quiet. No dramatic confrontation. No shouting. Just a slow withdrawal. I stopped responding immediately to family messages. I declined invitations politely. I focused on work with an intensity one had never allowed myself before. Late nights turned into early mornings. Projects that I had treated as routine became personal. For the first time, I stopped minimizing myself. I reviewed my finances with brutal honesty. I mapped out my responsibilities, my obligations, my leverage. I reminded myself why I had built the life I had, quietly, carefully, without their involvement. There had been reasons. There had been sacrifices. There had been nights when I questioned whether it was worth it, whether staying under the radar was costing me more than it was saving. Weeks passed. The wedding faded into family lore, retold as a beautiful night, a perfect celebration. I was mentioned less and less, which suited everyone just fine. My aunt posted photos from the honeymoon preparations, captions filled with gratitude and excitement. My mother commented on every post, hearts and well wishes. I watched from a distance, feeling oddly detached. Then, one afternoon, I received a message from Mark. Hey, it read. Quick question. Do you know anything about the trust paperwork? Mom said you might. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. A little, I wrote back. Why? There's some delay, he said. Nothing serious, probably. Just wanted to check. Probably. The word echoed in my head. I told him I would look into it and put the phone down without elaborating. That night, I sat at my desk, the same one where I had spent years building something no one in my family bothered to understand. I opened my laptop and reviewed documents I had not touched in months. Trust structures, oversight clauses, contingencies written in careful language that most people skimmed past, assuming they would never matter. I did not feel triumphant. I felt grounded, focused. This was not about revenge yet. It was about reclaiming something I had given away piece by piece. My confidence, my agency, my voice. In the days that followed, I made small but deliberate changes. I updated my wardrobe, not to impress anyone, but to reflect how I saw myself now. I started saying no without explanations. I corrected people when they made assumptions about me. I stopped laughing at jokes that landed at my expense. The rise did not look impressive from the outside. No announcements. No grand gestures. Just a steady rebuilding of boundaries I had never enforced. My aunt called once, leaving a voicemail filled with forced cheer and vague apologies. I did not call back right away. When I eventually did, I kept the conversation brief, polite, distant. She noticed. They all did. At work, opportunities emerged that I would have previously brushed aside as inconvenient. I took them. I spoke up in meetings. I claimed credit where it was due. Colleagues who had once overlooked me began to listen. Not because I had changed who I was, but because I stopped shrinking. One evening, as I was leaving the office, my phone buzzed again. The same neutral contact. The same calm tone. They're asking questions, the message read. Nothing official yet. Just noise. I leaned against the building, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, steadier than I remembered. Let them, I typed back. I slipped my phone into my pocket and headed home, aware that the ground beneath my family's assumptions was starting to shift. They just did not know it yet. By the time the questions turned from noise into concern, I was ready. It started subtly, the way these things always do. A text here. A voicemail there. Nothing accusatory, just confusion wrapped in politeness. My Aunt Carol left a message that was almost cheerful if you did not listen closely enough. She said there must have been a misunderstanding, that paperwork sometimes took longer than expected, that weddings were stressful and maybe wires had crossed. She ended with a laugh that sounded practiced. I did not respond. Mark called next. He was more direct, though still careful, like someone testing ice before stepping onto it. They're saying the release didn't go through, he told me. The bank is asking for confirmation. Mom said you might be able to help move things along. Help. That word carried weight now. I'm looking into it, I said calmly. These things take time. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Okay, he said slowly. Just let me know. I hung up and sat back in my chair, hands folded, breathing evenly. I had spent years managing risk, evaluating exposure, understanding how systems behaved under pressure. Families, I had learned, were no different from financial structures. They relied on assumptions, on patterns, on the belief that certain people would always play their assigned roles. I had stopped playing mine. The trust itself was not something I had created. It had existed long before me, drafted by my grandparents with good intentions and vague language. They had wanted flexibility, support for milestones, oversight to ensure funds were used responsibly. What they had not anticipated was how much discretion they had handed to the quiet grandson no one paid attention to, the one who listened more than he spoke. I had been asked to review the trust years ago, back when I worked a junior role, and my aunt dismissed it as a learning opportunity. She had laughed when I took it seriously. At least it'll keep you busy, she had said. I kept copies of everything. Over the next few weeks, I did not act. I observed. I let the uncertainty spread. I watched as my mother grew anxious, calling more frequently, her tone shifting from dismissive to conciliatory. I listened as my aunt's messages became sharper, less patient. I noted how quickly concern turned into entitlement. At one point, Carol left a voicemail that dropped the pretense entirely. Alex, she said, irritation bleeding through her words. This is getting inconvenient. Mark and his wife are relying on that money. You wouldn't want to cause problems for them, would you? I replayed that message several times. Not because it hurt, but because it clarified something I had never allowed myself to admit before. Their kindness had always been conditional. Their concern transactional. I began documenting everything. Dates, times, messages. Not because I planned to confront them yet, but because I had learned the value of preparation. I reached out to the banker, not with instructions, but with questions, clarifications, hypotheticals. I asked about procedures, about safeguards, about the precise language required to release funds. He answered each one professionally, neutrally, unaware of the larger story unfolding around his inbox. Meanwhile, I made a few quiet calls of my own. People I had worked with, advisors who respected discretion, friends who understood the difference between patience and passivity. I did not frame it as revenge. I framed it as due diligence. During a Sunday dinner I declined, my mother finally confronted me over the phone. Why are you being so distant? She asked, frustration slipping through her controlled tone. We're family. I almost corrected her, almost reminded her of every time I had been made to feel like an afterthought. Instead, I said, I've been busy. With what? She pressed. With my life, I replied. She went quiet then, as if recalibrating. We just don't want any unnecessary complications, she said carefully. Neither do I answered. And I meant it. The setup required patience. I waited for the right moment, the point where their need intersected with my leverage. It arrived sooner than I expected. Mark called again, this time late at night. He sounded tired. The travel agency needs confirmation, he said. They're holding reservations, but not for long. Mom is stressed. Everyone is stressed. I understand, I said. These things can be overwhelming. He hesitated. Did we do something to upset you? There it was. The first crack. I thought about answering honestly. About telling him how it felt to be laughed at, dismissed, underestimated. Instead, I said, I just want to make sure everything is handled correctly. That's good, he said quickly. That's really good. After the call, I sat in the dark of my apartment, city noise drifting in through the windows. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt resolve. The kind that comes when you finally accept that standing up for yourself will disappoint people who benefited from you staying quiet. I drafted an email but did not send it. Not yet. It outlined conditions. Reasonable ones. Transparent ones. A request for acknowledgement. For respect. For accountability. I knew how it would be received. With disbelief first. Then outrage. Then bargaining. The next morning, my aunt showed up at my door unannounced. She stood there with a smile that did not reach her eyes, dressed carefully, as if presentation could smooth over weeks of mounting tension. We should talk, she said. I stepped aside and let her in, already aware that this conversation would change everything. But I did not start it yet. I offered her a seat. I poured her water. I listened as she spoke, her words circling the issue without ever naming it directly. And as she talked, I realized that the moment I had been preparing for was finally here. She finished her water and set the glass down with a deliberate clink, as if sound itself could anchor control. "Alex," my aunt said, folding her hands in her lap, "this whole situation has gotten blown out of proportion. Families have misunderstandings. That's normal." I nodded once. I let the silence stretch. I had learned that people who were used to filling the room with their voices grew uncomfortable when no one rushed to reassure them. "You know, your grandparents set that trust up for moments like this," she continued. "Weddings. New beginnings. It would be a shame if something so beautiful were delayed." "Delayed," I repeated calmly. "Yes," she said quickly. "Delayed. Not denied. Of course not. We just need you to confirm whatever the bank is asking for, so we can all move forward." I leaned back in my chair. "Before we do that," I said, "I want to make sure we're aligned." She smiled, relieved. "Of course. I want clarity," I said. "On expectations. On respect. On how decisions involving family assets are discussed." Her smile tightened. "Alex, this isn't really the time for—" "It is," I interrupted gently. She blinked, and used to that. I slid a folder across the table. It was thin, neat, labeled. She glanced at it, then back at me. "What's this?" "A summary," I said, "of the trust provisions, oversight clauses, release conditions, and the discretionary authority granted to the reviewer." Her eyes flicked down, scanning words she had never bothered to read closely before. I watched recognition dawn slowly, followed by something sharper. "You're saying you can stop this," she said quietly. "I'm saying I can ensure it's handled correctly," I replied, "which includes confirming that beneficiaries understand the terms." She looked up. "Mark understands." "Does he?" I asked. "Because when he called me last week, he said this money was guaranteed." She hesitated. "Well, that's just how it's always been." "That's not how it's written," I said. Her voice hardened. "This feels punitive." I met her gaze. "This feels overdue." She stood abruptly. "You're holding this over us because of a joke?" I did not raise my voice. "I'm responding to a pattern." She stared at me, searching for the version of me she was used to. The quiet one. The accommodating one. The one who absorbed comments and smoothed things over. When she did not find him, her posture shifted. "You're really going to do this," she said. "To your own family." I smiled slightly. "I am my own family." She left shortly after that, the door closing behind her with less force than I expected. I sat there for a long time after, breathing evenly, feeling something settle into place. Not satisfaction. Alignment. The next call came from my mother. "What did you say to your aunt?" she demanded. "I explained the process," I said. "She's beside herself," my mother snapped. "This is embarrassing." "For whom?" I asked. "For all of us," she said. "People are asking questions." I considered that. They always do. She went quiet. "You don't have to be difficult," she said finally. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm being precise." That conversation ended the same way most of ours had ended over the years, with her frustrated and me unmoved. Mark called the following day. He sounded different, less confident. "They told me you're putting conditions on the release," he said. "I'm ensuring compliance," I corrected. "With what?" "With the trust," I said, "and with basic accountability." He exhaled sharply. "Alex, I didn't know any of this." "If someone crossed a line—" "Multiple lines were crossed," I said calmly. "Over years." There was a long pause. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. I answered honestly. "Acknowledgement. And a reset." "A reset," he repeated. "Yes," I said. "Where I'm not treated like a punchline. Where decisions involving shared resources are discussed, not assumed. Where respect isn't conditional." Another pause. Then, softer, "If I agree to that, will you approve it?" I closed my eyes briefly. Not because the decision was hard, but because it was final. "Once the trust requirements are met," I said, "yes." They met them within 48 hours. Emails arrived. Formal apologies written by someone else, but signed by familiar names. Acknowledgements phrased carefully, as if stepping through a minefield of pride. My aunt called again, this time with a different tone. Controlled. Measured. She did not joke. She did not laugh. "I understand now," she said. "I didn't realize how much responsibility you carried." I accepted that without comment. The banker confirmed everything in writing. The funds were released according to protocol, with documentation attached and safeguards clarified. The honeymoon went forward, though scaled back. Not canceled, not ruined, just adjusted. The fallout was quieter than I expected. There was no dramatic family implosion, no public confrontation, just a subtle reordering. At the next gathering, conversations shifted. People asked me questions and waited for the answers. My aunt did not make jokes at my expense. My mother introduced me differently. Not proudly, not warmly, but accurately. Mark thanked me privately. Not effusively, not dramatically, just sincerely. And me? I slept better. Weeks later, I found the folded place card from the wedding in my jacket pocket while cleaning out my closet. My name still misspelled. I unfolded it, looked at it once, and dropped it into the trash. I did not need it anymore. Because the thing I learned through all of this was simple, and it came at a cost I was finally willing to pay. When people expect nothing from you, they also expect you to accept it. And the moment you stop doing that, everything changes. There's a certain kind of silence that only happens at weddings, a pressure cooker hush filled with expectation, tension, and smiling faces that don't quite reach the eyes. That's exactly where I found myself 3 weeks ago, standing under the string lights of an overpriced winery in upstate New York, watching my nephew and his fiancée practice their vows. Everyone around me looked picture perfect, polished, grateful, like they belonged in a family I barely recognized anymore. And I stood there clapping when prompted, nodding on cue, and trying to swallow the lump forming in my throat because I had just been handed the final straw in a long, twisted saga of being taken for granted. My name's Gerald. I'm 52, no kids, never married. Successful, sure. My career in logistics consulting has treated me well, maybe too well. I was always the cool uncle growing up, the one with the big backyard, the generous Christmas presents, the kind who let you take an extra scoop of ice cream when your parents weren't looking. I didn't mind playing that role, not at first. I never expected much back. But somewhere along the way, generosity turned into expectation. And expectation curdled into entitlement. My brother, Dave, made sure of that. Dave's a year older than me, and he never let me forget it. Growing up, he was the golden boy, the quarterback, the family man. Married his high school sweetheart, had a kid at 24, bought a house at 25. While I was still figuring myself out and bouncing between countries consulting for international firms, Dave was collecting Father of the Year mugs and sending out Christmas cards featuring matching pajamas. Our parents adored him. Still do. To them, I was always the drifting bachelor. Useful, but peripheral. Like a rich uncle in a sitcom who shows up when it's convenient and disappears when things get too emotional. When Dave's son, Ethan, got engaged earlier this year, I was happy for him. Genuinely. Ethan's a good kid. Quiet, thoughtful, and always respectful to me, which stood out in a family where that kind of thing is getting rare. His fiancée, Marissa, was nice enough, very Pinteresty, very curated, very into calling everything a vibe. Whatever, not my business. But a few months after the engagement party, I got the first call. "Hey Jerry," Dave said, using the nickname only he insists on using. "So Ethan and Marissa found this venue. Amazing place, but they're tight on budget. I told them you'd probably help out. You know, like always." I should have paused right there. Should have said, "Let me think about it," or "Let's sit down and talk about it." But I didn't. I said sure. Just like that. Like a reflex I couldn't shake. Because that's what I always do, right? I step in. I patch the holes. I fund the dream. I foot the bill while everyone else sips champagne. What started as a little help turned into me covering the venue. Then the catering. Then the floral deposit. I didn't even see a breakdown of the costs. Just got vague emails from Marissa and forwarded invoices from Dave with a "thanks again" man thrown in like a pat on the back. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Because I figured, okay, it's a big day. I can be the bigger person. Maybe this time, someone would say thank you in a way that meant something. Then came the rehearsal dinner. It was hosted at the same winery where the wedding would take place. Candlelit tables, acoustic guitar in the background, the kind of night that costs $5,000 but is described as simple and intimate. I showed up in a charcoal suit, handed the valet my keys, and plastered on the same smile I'd been wearing since spring. There were speeches, laughter, clinking glasses, and not once, seriously, not one time, did anyone mention me. I wasn't expecting a standing ovation, but maybe a toast? A nod? Something? Instead, I watched Dave toast his wife for being the rock of this family and Marissa's parents for their generosity. I even clapped. Stupidly. Like an outsider in a movie about my own life. Later that evening, when most of the guests had trickled out, and I stood near the bar sipping a seltzer, Dave wandered over, already a little loose from the wine. He leaned in, rested an elbow on the bar, and said something that made my spine stiffen. "Just smile and pay for everything like you always do," he whispered, then smirked and clapped me on the shoulder like we were in on some grand joke. I froze. Literally. My jaw didn't move. My hands tightened around the glass, so hard I thought it might crack. He sauntered off like he hadn't just reduced me to a walking wallet in one sentence. It wasn't even the words themselves. It was the tone, the assumption, the smugness. Like he knew I wouldn't push back. Like he thought I needed to be needed so badly that I'd just keep taking it. That I'd keep funding the fantasy. That night, I drove back to my hotel in absolute silence. No music. No calls. Just the sound of tires against wet asphalt and my heart pounding against my ribs. Something shifted inside me. Not anger, at least not yet. More like a deep, cold clarity. A quiet realization that I'd spent years letting them write the script, and maybe it was time to flip the pages and take back the pen. I looked out at the rain-streaked windshield, gripped the steering wheel, and whispered to myself, "Let's see how they handle a real surprise." And the next morning, before anyone was awake, I made a phone call that would unravel everything they thought was secure. Everything they'd taken for granted. I woke up the next morning to sunlight cutting through the hotel curtains like a blade. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then it all came rushing back. Dave's smug face, the whisper, the shoulder pat like I was a dog who'd done a trick. I sat on the edge of the bed in my dress shirt from the night before, still buttoned halfway, and stared at my phone on the nightstand. There were already texts piling up in the family group chat. "Ethan, morning everyone. Big day today. Final walkthrough at 2. Dinner plans afterward. Marissa, don't forget the seating chart update. And Uncle G, I sent you the final invoice last night. Can you handle it before 1 p.m.? Love you. Dave, thanks again, Jerry. You're the best, brother." 3 texts. Not one of them asked. Not one of them even hesitated. It was just assumed, Gerald's got it. Uncle G will pay. He always does. He doesn't have a family of his own, so this is his role, right? The generous uncle. The invisible backbone. The bank with a face. I stared at the message from Marissa. "Love you." How easily that phrase came. Like a spell to keep the guilt at bay. I got dressed slower than usual that morning. My usual brisk, methodical routine was replaced by a strange quiet. My hands moved on their own, almost detached from my brain, buttoning my shirt, combing my hair. The whole time, I was trying to hold down something boiling inside me, something I hadn't let surface in years. On the drive to the venue, I passed by the florist's van, an actual branded van with Marissa and Ethan wedding, a whimsical union painted across the side. I couldn't help but let out a short, bitter laugh. Whimsical. That's what my money bought them. A fairy tale with scented eucalyptus and peonies overnight from California. The walkthrough was a blur. Everyone was there, Marissa's family, her younger sister taking selfies in the mirror-lined hallway, Ethan adjusting the cuffs of his blazer, looking nervous and hopeful. And then there was Dave, holding court like he was hosting a gala. At one point, I overheard him telling one of Marissa's uncles that the venue came through thanks to a few calls I made. I actually had to step outside for air. And that's when it happened. I was standing near the gravel lot, away from the rest of the group, when I saw Marissa's mom, Linda, arguing with the venue manager. I couldn't hear much, but it wasn't hard to pick up the tone. She was furious, pointing at a list in her hand. The manager kept shaking her head, looking uncomfortable. A few minutes later, Dave strolled over and handed me a piece of paper. "Hey, can you cover this one too?" he said. "It's the shuttle service for tomorrow. They forgot to include it in the original budget. I told them you'd take care of it." I blinked. "What shuttle service?" He shrugged, like it was no big deal. "The one from the guest hotel to the venue. Only like $2,000. We couldn't leave people stranded." I handed the paper back without a word. He raised an eyebrow. "Problem? Where's your credit card, Dave?" I asked, not loud, not aggressive. Just calm. He laughed, assuming I was joking. "Come on, man. You know how tight things are right now. And you've been so generous already. What's another little piece?" "Another little piece." That's what I was to him. A puzzle piece that kept the whole image intact. Replaceable. Invisible. I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. Back at the hotel that afternoon, I skipped the family dinner. Sent a short message saying I wasn't feeling well. No one asked if I was okay. No knock on the door. No calls. Just one thumbs up emoji from Ethan and a feel better from Marissa. At 11:38 p.m., I got another message from her. Marissa, just making sure we're all good for tomorrow. Smiley face. Venue opens at 10, but can you be there by 9 for setup? Hugs and kisses. I stared at that smiley face for what felt like an hour. That night, I opened my laptop, pulled up the venue contract I had saved in my documents, because of course I was the one who signed it, and scrolled through the terms. The cancellation policy was buried near the bottom. Refund eligible within 24 hours of the event, with a 20% administrative fee. Painful, yes, but legal. I didn't cancel it. Not yet. Because I needed to know, deep down, if I was really doing this because I'd been pushed too far, or if I was just lonely and bitter and looking for a reason to blow things up. So I went to bed and told myself maybe tomorrow someone would say something. A moment of gratitude. A glimpse of self-awareness. A toast that actually meant something. The next morning, I walked into the venue just before 9. Staff were already setting up. Marissa was on the phone barking orders to someone. Ethan waved when he saw me, but his expression was tight, distracted. The florist was running late. The cake had apparently arrived with the wrong inscription. Drama was already brewing. And then Dave arrived. He was wearing a new suit. Not rental. Designer. I could tell from the stitching on the lapel. Nice, huh? He said, running his hand down the sleeve. Got it for the occasion. Figured I deserved to look sharp today. Where'd you find the budget for that? I asked, unable to stop myself. He chuckled. Put it on a card. Wedding debt is tradition, isn't it? I almost laughed, but it died in my throat. An hour later, we were gathered near the outdoor seating area as the photographer did test shots. Someone brought up the rehearsal dinner, and Dave, again, told the story of how he pulled strings to secure the venue. How hard it was to get a place like this booked last minute. How stressful it had been managing everything. Marissa clung to his arm and nodded like he was the wedding godfather. Then Ethan, sweet, awkward Ethan, turned to me and said, Uncle G, thanks for helping out, man. I know my dad said you two worked on this together, so, yeah, really appreciate you being part of it. Something about that hit harder than I expected. It wasn't gratitude. It was misdirection. A whitewashed version of events fed to him by his father. Later that afternoon, while grabbing coffee near the bar, I overheard a conversation that sealed it. Linda, it's such a relief that Dave stepped in to cover everything. I was worried for a bit, you know, with how unstable Gerald's always been. Marissa, I know, right? I mean, I didn't want to say anything, but we were all kind of crossing our fingers he wouldn't flake. Linda, you just never know with the eccentric uncle types. Marissa, exactly. But luckily Dave's been incredible. Held everything together. They moved on, giggling about centerpieces. I stood behind the half wall, out of sight, and felt something inside me snap. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet, final break. Like the last fraying thread of a rope finally giving out. That was my breaking point. I returned to my hotel room, locked the door, and sat at the desk with my laptop. My finger hovered over the mouse for maybe 10 seconds. Then I clicked. Venue canceled. Refund initiated. 20% fee deducted. Confirmation sent to my email. And just like that, everything they thought was guaranteed vanished. They didn't know yet. Not then. Because sometimes revenge isn't about rage. Sometimes it's about stillness. Precision. Letting people walk into their own downfall without even realizing the floor beneath them has been removed. But even I didn't predict what would happen next. Because when they finally found out, they didn't just panic. They turned on me. All of them. I didn't stick around to watch the implosion. The venue cancellation confirmation had hit my inbox around 3:15 p.m., and by 3:45, I was packed and checked out of the hotel. I left the key card on the dresser, one neat little note for housekeeping, and nothing else. No goodbye, no explanation, no dramatic monologue, just silence. The ride out of town was strangely peaceful. The farther I got from the vineyard and its overpriced chandeliers and monogrammed cocktail napkins, the more my shoulders relaxed. My phone buzzed several times, at first from Ethan, then Marissa, then my brother. I didn't open a single one. I turned the phone over and drove with nothing but the sound of tires on pavement and the rhythm of my breath. A long exhale, like I was letting go of something I didn't know I'd been holding for years. But peace doesn't last. Not when you've spent your life being someone else's safety net. Eventually, they notice the rope is gone. By the time I stopped for gas 2 hours later, the voicemails were pouring in. First, they were polite. "Hey Uncle G, there's some mix-up with the venue. Can you call us back?" "Gerald, it's Dave. Just trying to figure out what's going on. No pressure, just give me a ring." "Uncle G, I think something's wrong with the contract." "Marissa's freaking out, haha. Let us know." Then the tone shifted. "Gerald, seriously, what is going on? You can't do this, man. Do you have any idea how many people are flying in for this? Grow up. You're sabotaging your own family over what?" A petty comment. Then came the texts. Angry ones. Paragraphs from Marissa. All caps from Linda. Even a voice memo from Dave that started calm and ended with him yelling, accusing me of ruining Ethan's life and tearing this family apart because of your ego. I didn't respond to any of it. Not that day. Not that week. I spent the next few days at a quiet little Airbnb 2 towns over. No Wi-Fi. Spotty cell service. Just me, a stack of paperbacks, and a kitchen stocked with coffee and fresh fruit. It was the first time in years I allowed myself to be unreachable. No client calls. No emails. No family favors. I slept late. Ate slowly. Walked barefoot through the garden at sunset. I thought it would feel selfish. But it didn't. It felt necessary. I finally checked back into the world the following Tuesday. My phone was a war zone. 87 unread messages. 32 missed calls. 11 voicemails. My email had blown up too. Some work-related, some not. But what caught my attention was a thread titled "Wedding Emergency," with over a dozen replies from various vendors. Apparently, once the venue canceled, everything else unraveled. The caterer backed out. The decorator couldn't proceed. The backup venue Marissa found wanted payment up front, which nobody had. They'd scrambled. Dave had tried to open a new line of credit and got denied. Marissa's parents didn't have the liquid cash. Ethan's college buddy started a GoFundMe, but it only raised a few $100s. The wedding was postponed indefinitely by Thursday. I kept reading, waiting for that twinge of guilt to hit me. It didn't come, but I'd be lying if I said the fallout didn't affect me. In the weeks that followed, the silence from my family became louder than the shouting ever was. I wasn't just uninvited. I was excommunicated. Nobody reached out. Nobody asked if I was okay. My parents didn't call. Neither did Ethan. And for a little while that hurt. I tried to shake it off. Dove back into work. Took on a big consulting project with a logistics firm in Chicago. Flew out there twice. Sat in endless meetings. Ran numbers. Fixed their supply chain issues. On paper, I was thriving. But something was off. I'd come home to a quiet apartment. Sit at the kitchen counter. Pour myself a scotch. And just sit. Stare at the ceiling. Wonder if maybe I had burned everything down too fast. Maybe I should have just spoken up. Made a speech. Drawn a line without detonating the bridge. Then one night, about a month after the wedding I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. It was from Ethan. "Uncle G, I don't know what to say. I'm not mad. Honestly, I'm not even surprised. I've been thinking a lot about that week and the way everyone treated you. I'm embarrassed. You were the only adult in the room, and we acted like you were just a piggy bank in a suit. I'm sorry. I wish I'd said something sooner. I should have spoken up when Dad kept dumping things on you. I should have thanked you properly. But I didn't. I was scared. Scared of rocking the boat. Scared of disappointing people. Marissa and I aren't together anymore. Not because of the wedding stuff, though that didn't help. We were already strained. The truth is, we wanted different things. She wanted a picture-perfect life. I wanted a real one. Thank you for doing what nobody else had the guts to do. I hope one day we can talk again. You were always more of a father to me than anyone ever knew. Ethan." I sat with that letter for a long time. Read it twice. 3 times. I don't cry easily, but I came close that night. Not because of the apology, but because it reminded me that all those years of giving, birthday checks, graduation gifts, holidays, late-night advice, they hadn't gone unnoticed. Someone had seen me. And that was the beginning of the rise. It wasn't dramatic. There was no montage of triumphant music and sweeping successes. It started small. I deleted the family group chat. Removed myself from the email threads. Changed my number. A quiet rebirth. I joined a boxing gym. something I'd always wanted to do but never found the time for. The trainer called me Silver Fox and didn't care what I did for a living. I liked that. I started going every morning, built a routine. My energy shifted. Clients noticed. Colleagues commented. Then came the side project. Years ago, I'd started building software for small logistics companies to manage their fleet routes more efficiently. I never had time to finish it. But now, with all this emotional bandwidth freed up, I dove back in. Long nights, quiet weekends, black coffee, and whiteboards covered in marker ink. 6 months later, I launched it. 3 months after that, it was acquired by a regional firm for a sum I hadn't even dared to imagine. It wasn't billionaire money, but it was legacy money. And that's when I really understood something. All those years I'd been handing over my time, my money, my presence, just to feel included, just to earn a spot at their table. But I never needed their table. I just needed to build my own. The best part? I never told them. Not Dave. Not Marissa. Not my parents. They still think I'm off somewhere licking my wounds, wounded and bitter. Let them. The truth is, I've never been clearer. And I'm not done yet. Because while I found peace in the fall, I also found clarity in the silence. And soon, they're going to find out what it really means to burn a bridge with the one person who kept the lights on. But that comes later. First, I needed to tie up some loose ends. It started with a wedding invitation. Not theirs, of course. That ship had sailed, caught fire, and sunk without a trace. This was from a former client turned friend, Mark, a VP at a mid-sized freight company I'd helped pull out of a tailspin years ago. He and his partner, Luis, were tying the knot in early fall and hosting the ceremony at an elegant estate in the Berkshires. The invite wasn't the trigger. It was what came with it, a simple handwritten note. Gee, hope you're doing well, my friend. I know it's been a rough stretch. Come celebrate with us. You deserve joy and closure. We saved you a seat at the head table, next to someone who's been dying to meet you. Cheers, M. Closure. That word hung in my mind like the scent of old cologne, familiar, bitter, oddly comforting. I hadn't thought about closure in a while. I'd been so focused on rebuilding, my health, my business, my peace, that I'd almost convinced myself I didn't need it. But reading that note, I realized I'd rebuilt the house and left the old mess rotting in the backyard. The wedding was in 6 weeks. I decided to use every single one of them. The idea came slowly, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. At first, it was just a flicker, the thought of Dave hearing my name again, not in shame or whispers, but in admiration. Not as the eccentric uncle, but as someone important, respected, successful, the man who walked away and thrived. Then the flicker became a fire. This wasn't about rubbing success in their faces. Not directly. It was about precision. Something strategic. Quiet. Cold. Beautiful. Because if there was one thing I'd learned from my years in logistics, it was that timing was everything. I started with research. I dug into Dave's latest business ventures. He'd been bouncing between small consulting gigs after getting laid off 2 years ago. LinkedIn told one story, photos of him in a co-working space, cheesy motivational posts. But the real picture emerged from some quiet digging. Turns out Dave had recently partnered with a shady little operation called Hawthorne Strategy Solutions. It sounded legitimate, but their filings were messy, missed deadlines, an LLC registered to a UPS store, a trail of bounced checks, a shell. And Dave, naturally, was listed as their director of client acquisition. I almost laughed. He couldn't even acquire his own venue. Through a few professional contacts, I confirmed that he'd recently pitched the company to a firm in Albany, one that I happened to have consulted for 3 years prior. The meeting hadn't gone well. They were skeptical, but Dave had promised to follow up in a few weeks with proof of capital and strategic partnerships. I made a call. Discreet. Respectful. Hey Barry, this is Gerald. Just a friendly heads up. If a guy named Dave Dunning shows up flashing his resume, you might want to double-check the books. Funny you say that, Barry replied. We've had some weird vibes from him. Kind of vague. Seems confident, though. That's his thing. Confidence in place of substance. Trust me, I've seen it firsthand. I didn't have to say more. Barry got it. One small thread snipped. Then I turned my attention to Linda and Marissa. Linda, it turns out, had recently joined a local charity board. Something about youth mentorship. Great cause. I respected it. But I also noticed that she was spearheading the upcoming fundraising gala. And they were desperate for sponsors. Now, I've never believed in mixing revenge with collateral damage. But I do believe in setting the record straight, especially when people build reputations on lies. Through a friend in PR, I anonymously sponsored 2 of the gala's vendors, florist and catering. Just a minor contribution. Enough to ensure my name would appear, discreetly, but undeniably, on the donor list printed in the program booklet. Gerald Dunning, logistics consultant. Founder, Stonebridge Fleet Systems. I could already picture Linda's face when she saw it. The name she tried to erase, right there in black ink under silver tier supporters. That was just the appetizer. The main course required finesse. For the past few months, I'd been mentoring a young guy named Noah, early 30s, whip-smart, recently launched his own logistics startup in Boston. I liked his drive. He reminded me of myself at that age, before the cynicism, before the family baggage weighed me down. Noah had talent, but no connections. I had connections, but no desire to scale again. So we struck a deal. I'd coach him, quietly, help secure meetings, polish decks, refine strategy. No equity, just mentorship. Legacy. He flourished. One evening over drinks, he mentioned a proposal he was preparing for a statewide delivery contract. High stakes. Competitive. Dave's company had apparently submitted one too. I almost choked on my old-fashioned. Hawthorne Solutions? I asked. Yeah, you know them. Let's just say, I know who not to trust. I didn't sabotage anything. Didn't make a call. Didn't bribe anyone. All I did was help Noah tighten his pitch. Clean up his numbers. Focus on what mattered. The rest took care of itself. 2 weeks later, Noah called me, breathless. We got it. State contract. 5 years. It's ours. I congratulated him. Told him he earned it. Then I opened a local news site the next day and saw the headline. Boston startup wins major state logistics contract, beating out industry vets. Dave's name wasn't mentioned, but I knew he saw it. He'd tried to fake his way into a seat I helped build, and I'd replaced him with someone better, cleaner, sharper, someone who actually worked. But the real move? That was still coming. Because through all this, through every subtle maneuver, every snipped thread, I kept one thing constant: silence. No responses to Dave's last angry voicemail. No reaction to Marissa's half-hearted email about letting bygones be bygones. No return call to my mother, who left a rambling message one Sunday afternoon asking if I'd finally calmed down. I hadn't calmed down. I had evolved. And now, with 2 weeks until Mark and Louise's wedding, the final piece clicked into place. Mark texted me a photo of the seating chart. Sure enough, there I was, table 1, head table, right next to a name I hadn't expected to see. Thought you'd enjoy this, Mark wrote. That's Judge Elaine Broderick. Retired now, but still does private arbitration and family law consulting. Super sharp. Might be a good connection for that thing you mentioned. I hadn't mentioned anything. Not to Mark. Not yet. But life has a funny way of handing you the exact ally you need at the exact moment you're ready to make a move. Because Dave's final mistake, his real mistake, wasn't using me for money. It was what came next. I found out through Ethan, quietly, over coffee in a park one rainy afternoon. He looked pale, tired. Dad tried to open a line of credit last month, he told me. Used your name as a co-signer. Didn't tell the bank you hadn't authorized it. Is that even legal? No. But the application got flagged before it processed. They're investigating. Did he forge my signature? I think so. There it was. Not arrogance. Not just disrespect. Fraud. I said nothing at first. Just stirred my coffee and stared at the ducks gliding through the rain-speckled pond. Ethan apologized again, like it was his fault. Like he'd been the one trying to sell off my identity piece by piece. I told him not to worry. That I'd handle it. And I would. But not in anger. I had 6 days until the wedding. 6 days to sit across from Judge Broderick. 6 days to decide whether to press charges, sue him, or merely expose everything and let the consequences unfold naturally. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. And this time, I wasn't just walking away. I was walking in, with every receipt, every contract, every dotted I and crossed T. Mark's wedding was everything mine wasn't. Joyful, honest, free of performance. The estate glowed that late September afternoon, with white chairs lining the gardens and soft jazz rolling in from the string quartet. Guests mingled under lanterns that would light up at dusk. Love, actual love, filled the air. And I was calm. Completely. Not nervous, not eager, just ready. When I arrived, I took my place at the head table, where a small gold card read Gerald Dunning. The seat beside mine bore another, Honorable Elaine Broderick, Ret. She arrived 5 minutes later. Petite, silver-haired, sharp eyes like glass cutting through fog. She extended a hand and introduced herself. I told her I was honored, and we started chatting over champagne. Small talk, at first, the food, the decor, how she knew Mark. Then we shifted. I told her I was a consultant, mentioned I'd stepped away from family for a while after a certain betrayal. Her eyes sharpened at that. Financial? I nodded. Attempted fraud, actually. Forged documents. My name on a line of credit. It was caught in time, but I'm weighing next steps. She sipped her drink and leaned in slightly. You're considering pressing charges? I'm considering closure. In the most effective, irreversible form. Her smile was faint, almost mischievous. Closure doesn't always require a courtroom. Sometimes it just needs sunlight. That was all the permission I needed. I told her the details, carefully, no exaggeration. Just the facts. She listened without judgment. Asked 3 questions. Not at once. If you want to sue, she said, I can refer you to a forensic accountant and a former DA. They'll eat him alive. I want something quieter, I said. Surgical. Public, but not messy. I want him to know I know. I want everyone to know. Her eyes gleamed. Then let me introduce you to someone I mentored. Discreet. Ethical. And absolutely ruthless when the situation calls for it. That's how I met Nadine. A private investigator in her early 40s, razor sharp, with a quiet confidence that reminded me of myself when I wasn't bleeding out emotionally for people who didn't deserve it. Within 2 weeks, Nadine had built a dossier on Dave. All of it legal. All of it damning. It was worse than I thought. Dave had used my name to attempt loans more than once. 3 failed applications in the last year, each one more desperate. In one, he digitally scanned my signature from an old birthday card and pasted it onto a PDF. The banks had flagged it, but none had contacted me directly. He'd also named me as a silent investor on Hawthorne Solutions' proposal to another firm in Connecticut, one that had already published a glowing press release assuming the deal was signed. They listed Stonebridge Advisory as a strategic partner. Stonebridge Advisory didn't exist. Not until I made it real. I registered it that same day, bought the domain, filed the paperwork, set up a landing page with a mission statement. We specialize in cutting through noise and exposing inefficiencies in strategic operations. I hired a graphic designer to create a clean, clinical logo. Then I contacted the Connecticut firm under a pseudonym, posing as a due diligence officer seeking clarity on Hawthorne's investors. Within 2 days, they responded, confused. No one had spoken to me. The deal went on pause. Strike 1. Strike 2 came when I sent the dossier, anonymously, of course, to the State Licensing Board for Business Consultants. I included documentation showing how Dave had falsely listed a series of credentials, including a made-up logistics certification that, coincidentally, shared the same name as one I actually held. They opened an investigation. Quietly. Strike 3? That was public. I took out a full-page ad in the local paper, the same one my parents read every Sunday morning. The ad was clean, minimalist. Just a white background with black text. To anyone who's ever been told to just smile and pay for everything. You don't owe silence to people who mistake kindness for weakness. Sincerely, the guy who canceled the wedding. No names. No specifics. But enough. They knew. I know because the call started again. This time I picked up. The first was from my mother. Her voice was strained, brittle. Gerald, what have you done? Something I should have done years ago, I said calmly. You embarrassed your family. No. I exposed what you all ignored. She hung up. I didn't call back. The second call was from Ethan. You did it, didn't you? I did. You're not mad at me, are you? No. You told me the truth. That's all I ever wanted. Dad's freaking out. Mom too. They're blaming each other. Linda's cut them off. Marissa won't return their calls. It's a mess. Maybe it needed to be. Are you okay? I smiled. I've never been better. And it was true. A week later, Dave's company was dissolved. He posted a vague Facebook status about toxic investors and betrayal from within. Nobody responded. The state board formally revoked his license to practice as a consultant. He deleted his LinkedIn the same day. He tried to reach out. Left a voicemail. Jerry, I don't know what you're trying to prove, but this is low. Family shouldn't turn on each other like this. We can fix it. Just call me back, all right? Please. I didn't. But I saved the message. It reminded me of who I used to be. The one who would have caved. The one who would have said, fine, I'll pay. Just this once. Not anymore. Weeks turned into months. Word got around. Quietly, but thoroughly. The family that once treated me like a background character suddenly remembered I existed, but now, I was no longer available. I was booked, busy, unreachable. Ethan came to visit around Thanksgiving. We took a walk through the park again, like we had that rainy day months earlier. It's weird, he said. Everyone acts like you vanished. But you didn't. You just stopped answering. I didn't vanish, I said. I just stopped performing. You know, I'm glad you did. Me too. And that was it. No fireworks. No climactic confrontation. Just peace. The kind of peace that comes from finally putting the sword down after a lifetime of defending yourself from the people who were supposed to love you. I still get the occasional holiday card from distant relatives, the kind who used to write, "Tell your brother I said hi." Now they write, "Hope you're well. Let's catch up." I don't respond. Stonebridge Advisory has grown quietly. I don't advertise. I don't pitch. Clients come through word of mouth. I take on the cases that matter. And when I'm not working, I'm boxing, cooking, reading, living. I never did sue Dave. I didn't need to. Because the truth? I didn't want him in prison. I wanted him exactly where he is now, exposed, irrelevant, and forced to live every day knowing the one person he underestimated was the same person who built the world around him. And then took it away.